Everybody. Okay, welcome to week 3. We're halfway through the term, so I'm going to work on getting caught up on grades. Anything that hasn't been turned in from week 1 and week 2, I'm going to be plugging a 0 in that slot. You are still fine with submitting those things later if needs be. Um, you can still recoup all those points. I just want you to know, what you have and what's still outstanding. Okay. Also, by midterm, um, we need to have all our grades up to date. So there's that. Also, keep in mind, if you're struggling with any of the material, you can always reach out to me directly. You have my uh, direct line and you have my um, email, and you can always reach out in Canvas as well. That said, this week we're going to be doing a deeper dive on decision making. A lot of the concepts that were kind of covered in other chapters, but we're going to bring all of it together in this chapter. So some of it's going to kind of be review, just hang in there, and it might answer some of your questions if you've had any up to this point. That said, I will stop introducing it and just get on with it. Let's see. Okay. So this is when we actually pull everything together that we've learned up to this point and we start working on our um, decision making models. Okay. So remember, this is a review. The first thing we need to do when we're making our business decisions, okay, is we need to recognize our two alternatives, okay? So the first step is just identifying those alternatives so that we know what we are deciding between, okay? Next up, we need to decide what our criteria is. What are we using to make this decision? Okay. What are our relevant costs and relevant benefits? Okay. And which costs are irrelevant because we should not be considering those. All right. Remember those sunk costs, which sometimes make us irrational in our decision making. Okay. Um, we need to focus on that differential analysis that we learned last week. Okay, our future costs and benefits that are different between our two alternatives. Okay, anything else that's the same between the two, those are irrelevant. Okay, um, remember our vocabulary. So any cost that's different between two alternatives is known as a differential cost. And any revenue that's different between the two alternatives is called differential revenue. The amount of difference between the costs is called incremental cost, and an avoidable cost is anything that you can eliminate if you choose one option over the other. Okay? Sunk costs are always irrelevant. That's a cost that you already incurred and you can't change no matter what you do. All right. And future costs and benefits that don't differ between the two alternatives all are irrelevant. Okay. Now, that might sound like a repeat of this slide, right? It's kind of like, that old joke, rule number 1, I'm always the boss. Rule number 2, see rule number 1. Okay, this is the same thing. Okay, you should only consider your relevant costs. P.S. Sunk costs are irrelevant. Costs that don't change between your alternatives are irrelevant. Okay. Um, so you should also consider your opportunity costs, which are not monetary, but they still represent a difference between two options. Okay, so here is an example. Cynthia, a Boston student, is considering visiting her friend in New York. She can drive or take the train. By car, it's 230 miles to her friend's apartment, and she's trying to decide which is less expensive. Okay, so you have various costs here, the straight line depreciation on the car, the cost of gasoline, um, parking fees at school. You've got your fixed cost items pulled out here, and then your cost for per mile are your variable costs. Okay. So then we have additional information that might inform our decision. Um, Reduced resale value on the car since we put all those miles on it. Round trip train fare. Um, Benefits of relaxing on the train. That's an opportunity cost, right? We can't put a dollar value on that. The cost of putting the dog in a kennel while you're gone, $40. You're going to be gone no matter what, right? Benefits of having the car in New York, that's an opportunity cost. Okay. A convenience cost. It doesn't have a dollar value. The hassle of parking your car in New York. All right. And the per day cost of parking a car in New York. I think I said this last time when we went through this example. Where the heck do they find a parking situation in New York that only costs $25 a day? That's crazy. I would jump right on that. But anyway, okay. Which costs and benefits are relevant to this decision? Okay. On the one hand, the cost of the car is a sunk cost. It's not relevant. But the annual cost of insurance, nope, also not relevant. It will remain the same if she drives or takes the train. But the cost of gasoline, that is relevant if she decides to drive, okay? If she takes the train, she would avoid the cost of gasoline. All right, so that's an example of our relevant versus irrelevant costs, okay? The cost of maintenance and repairs on the car. Okay, that's relevant because in the long run, that's going to depend on how many miles you drive the car. The monthly school parking fee, not relevant. Okay, it must be paid if Cynthia drives the car or takes the train. So we can see that some of these per mile, these variable costs that we have in our cost list are relevant and others are not relevant. Okay, so which costs are relevant? All right. We know the decline in the resale value is relevant. Okay. We know the train fare is relevant because if she decides to drive, she can avoid that cost. All right. The ability to relax on the train, that is relevant. All right. But the kennel cost to kennel her dog while she's gone, not relevant because she's going to do that either way. All right. The cost of parking in New York, definitely relevant because if she takes the train, she doesn't have to park her car. The benefits of having your car, all right? So the convenience of not having to call an Uber or whatever. Um, it's relevant, but it doesn't have a dollar value. Okay, that's going to be an opportunity cost. All right. So just looking at the financial standpoint, Cynthia would be better off taking the train. All right. Um, though there's still non-financial factors that could influence her decision one way or the other. All right. So the relevant cost of driving is more expensive than the relevant costs of taking the train. Pretty straightforward, right? Um, okay. So let's put it into an actual managerial accounting example. So the management of a company is considering a new labor saving machine. It rents for $3,000 per year. Data about the company's annual sales and costs with and without the new machine are as follows. Okay, so we have our income statement set up. On the far left, this is our current situation. All right, if we had the new machine, this is the situation. So, our direct labor costs would go down. Okay. Um, we would have additional rent on the machine, right? So our fixed expenses would go up. Our contribution margin up here goes up, right? Because we have fewer costs. All right. And then our net operating income all together goes up by $12,000. So that looks like a pretty good deal, right? Our income goes up. Um, the only costs that are going to be different between these two alternatives are the direct labor costs, right? Because now you have this machine, so you don't have to pay as much in labor, and the rental fee on the machine. Okay. So really, you could shrink this down to saying the decrease in direct labor cost is 15,000 and the increase in the rental expense is 3,000, so the difference is 12,000. Okay. So we don't have to put it in this big table where we look at two income statements side by side. Okay. We could just look at the two costs that change to get our change in income. Does that make sense? All right. Um, so if we use this differential approach, okay, where we just compare the two things that change. So this right here is our differential approach, okay? Um, there may not, when you're making a projection, there may not be enough information there to create an entire alternative income statement, okay? Also, if you show the entire income statement to your manager, they might get confused because it contains both relevant and irrelevant costs. That is your book's opinion. Okay. And for the purposes of assignments and tests, please put that into your memory banks. However, I will say from personal experience that I prefer the table presentation um, because managers are used to looking at financial statements. If you just have a slide with this, with this, I feel like they don't know where those numbers come from. It looks like witchcraft to them. This is more confusing, in my opinion, but I am not the writer of your textbook. So please, in their opinion, smaller is better. Okay, so more real world examples. Okay. One of the most important decisions that you can make in upper management is to decide whether or not to keep or drop a business segment that has become unprofitable. Okay. Um, and of course, our decisions hinge on that financial impact. Okay. How do we reduce our costs? How do we increase our profits? Right. We have to be careful when we are making these decisions to carefully analyze our costs and differentiate between the things which we can and cannot change, okay? Um, Here's our example of that. Due to the declining popularity of digital watches, what's that? The Lavelle Company's digital watch line has not reported a profit for several years. Lavelle is considering whether to keep this product line or drop it. Okay, so remember, Lavelle should drop the digital watch segment if its profit would increase, okay? And Lavelle will compare the contribution margin that would be lost if the digital watch line was discontinued to the fixed expenses that would be avoided if the line was discontinued, okay? All right, so here we go. Here is our income statement for the segment. Notice that they are operating at a loss right now, $100,000 in the hole. Okay, so once we drill down into their accounting, we discover that the fixed general factory overhead and the fixed general administrative expenses wouldn't be affected by dropping the digital watch line. Those two expenses are assigned to this product. They'd just be reallocated elsewhere. Remember our allocation basis where we're spreading out our overhead over all the segments. So if we drop a segment, we just have to reallocate all that overhead. It doesn't go away. We're using it to cover all the segments. It's a common cost, okay? The equipment that's used to manufacture these digital watches has no resale value because who wants to make digital watches? It also has no alternative use. Okay, so should Lavelle retain or drop the digital watch segment? Well, let's do a side-by-side comparison of the things that we can actually change. Okay, so if we got rid of this line, we would lose $300,000 in contribution margin. Okay. The fixed costs that would be avoided are only 260,000, right? So we would be losing an additional 40,000. So up to this point, we've been operating at a $100,000 loss. We'd be operating at a $140,000 loss if we got rid of the digital watches. Okay. Um, so here we just did the differential analysis. Okay, we took the parts that we can change and subtracted them from one another. This is the one that your book prefers. Okay, we could do a financial statement approach. Okay, where we get rid of our sales, right? We would get rid of all of these expenses. We would lose this contribution margin. Okay. We'd lose the well, we wouldn't lose the general factory overhead. Remember, that just gets redistributed. So we keep that there. The salary line of the line manager, we would get rid of that 90,000. Okay, that is an avoidable cost. The depreciation on the machinery, that's a sunk cost. Okay, we're not getting that back, so we don't have to consider that. All right. We can avoid advertising those digital watches if we're not making them anymore, and we could stop renting the factory space. Okay, so as we predicted in our smaller model, if we drop the line, we're losing $140,000 a year instead of $100,000 a year. 40,000 in additional losses. Okay, which is counterintuitive, right? We're getting rid of an unprofitable segment and we're losing even more money. Okay, but the reason why this is happening is because of those allocated costs. We're stuck with those costs whether we keep this segment or not. And it sort of throws off your decision making if you're not keeping a sharp eye out for which costs are avoidable and which are not. Okay, so those unavoidable common costs are making the product line appear unprofitable, when in fact, dropping the product line would make the situation even more unprofitable. Okay. Next up, we're going to look at make or buy analysis. Okay. This is when a company um, is involved in more than one activity in its value chain. Okay. We call that vertical integration. All right. Um, so if you carry out those activities yourself, um, we call it internal activity versus external. We're getting those items from outside. Okay. So if we're a retail store selling widgets, do we buy the widgets from an outside supplier or do we make them in-house ourselves? That's called a make or buy decision. Again, the vocabulary for accounting is pretty simple, right? If you're vertically integrated, all right, you do have a smoother flow of parts and materials. Okay, you can produce the things that you need as needed. Also, you have more control over the quality of your products. And you get to control all the profits because you're in it from the raw materials all the way to the sale. The downside is you don't get to take advantage of economies of scale. Okay. Um, so a company that specializes in making nothing but widgets, they can get discounts on buying raw materials in bulk and supplying multiple stores with their products. Okay. Um, So it might turn out that a company that's specialized in manufacturing can produce this item more cheaply, and you can buy it externally, not make it yourself, for a lower price. But keep in mind, you are then losing that control over the quality of the products that you're selling. Okay, so let's look at an example of that. Essex Company manufactures part 4A that is used in one of its products. The unit product costs of the part are as follows. Okay, we got direct materials, direct labor, variable overhead, depreciation, supervisor salary, general factory overhead, all on this one unit. Okay, so according to this table, the unit product cost is $30. If you've been paying attention up to this point, you may have noticed that maybe some of these costs aren't really avoidable. Let's see. All right, extra information. The equipment used to manufacture part 4A has no resale value, okay? And the total amount of general factory overhead is allocated on the basis of direct labor hours. It would be unaffected by this decision. We just redistribute it to the other areas. Okay. The $30 unit product cost is based on 20,000 parts produced each year. All right. So an outside supplier has offered to provide the 20,000 parts at a cost of $25 per part. Now, your immediate reaction might be, oh, 25 is less than 30. Let's go for that, right? But let's drill deeper using our accounting brains and look at what costs are actually avoidable and which are not. I've identified some of them for you already, okay? So the outside purchase price, $25 per item at 20,000 units, it would be $500,000. Boom, done. All right, now we have our per unit cost. right? Um, at $30. But remember the depreciation of the equipment, that's a sunk cost. We can't get that back. And the allocated general factory overhead, that's going to be spread to the other divisions if we're not allocating it to this area. So that is also unavoidable. So when we look at the cost to us actually to make these 20,000 units, it's only $340,000, okay, in unavoidable costs. So in reality, it is cheaper to make these items ourselves. Does that make sense? I don't know why I asked that because I'm recording this and you're not in real time. But if you have any questions about this, please reach out. All right. Again, this depreciation is a sunk cost. This allocated cost, we can't avoid that. Okay. So the financial advantage of making Part A is $160,000. Okay. Meaning it's $160,000 cheaper to make it ourselves than to buy it from an outside source. Okay. A review of opportunity costs. Remember, they are not cash outlays, okay? It's a benefit that you missed out on because you chose a different route, okay? For example, if you could use the space on the factory floor where you're making part 4A for some other purpose, that might be an opportunity cost that you are foregoing in order to make this part yourself. All right, special order decisions. This is a one-time order that's not part of your normal ongoing business, okay? It's a special order. You should consider the incremental costs and benefits only, okay? Remember your relevant costs. All right. So here's our example. Jet Inc. makes a single product whose normal selling price is $20 per unit. A foreign distributor offers to purchase 3,000 units for $10 per unit. It's a one-time order and it won't affect the company's regular business. All right. We're capable of making 10,000 units, but we're only producing 5,000, right, to meet our regular demand. Okay. So should Jet accept this offer? Here are our costs in our contribution income statement. All right, without the special order. Okay. We have net operating income at the end of $12,000. Here's our regular revenue. All right. If Jet accepts the special order, the incremental revenue will exceed the incremental costs. In other words, the net operating income will increase by $6,000. All right, this suggests that Jet should accept the offer. So the incremental revenue, they're going to pay $10 a piece for 3,000 items. All right, and the cost, we're just looking at the variable cost here, is 24,000. All right. That gives us a financial advantage of $6,000. Now we're assuming here that all our fixed costs are unavoidable. All right. So here is our concept check. I will leave you guys to work through that on your own. The solution is on the slide. It is very similar to the example that we just worked. Okay, now we're going to talk about constrained resources. This is when we have to make a volume trade-off decision because we don't have the capacity to make everything that our customers could possibly want. Okay? We have to trade off production of some products in favor of others to maximize profits. So our demand is way up here. Our demand is way up here, and our supply is kind of in the middle, right? So we have to maximize our profits selling the most profitable mix of items, okay? Some vocabulary for you guys. When you have a limited resource and it restricts the company's ability to satisfy demand, that is called a constraint. Okay. And the particular machine or process that is limiting overall output is called a bottleneck. Okay. All right. So, some more things to be aware of. Fixed costs are usually unaffected. All right. Um, and it's not necessarily the fact that you should push the products with the highest contribution margins. Okay, that's not necessarily the most profitable option. We have to consider cost as well. Okay, the total contribution margin should be maximized by promoting those products and accepting those orders that provide the highest contribution margin overall in relation to the constraining resource. Okay, so in this example, the Ensign company produces two products. All right, product one and product two. Selling price per unit, $60 for product one, $50 for product two. Variable expenses per unit, 36 for product one, 35 for product two. That gives us a contribution margin much higher on product one. All right. The demand in units, 2,000 of these, 2,200 of these, contribution margin ratio. All right. Here is the important piece of information. The processing time required on machine A1 per unit. Product one requires a whole minute to produce one item, whereas product two only needs half a minute. Okay, that's going to be very important on the next slide. Some extra information. So this machine A1 is the constrained resource. It is at 100% capacity. All right. All our other machines have excess capacity. So this is our bottleneck, this machine A1. It has a capacity of 2,400 minutes per week. Okay, so remember from here, we need 4,200 items to meet demand. We're not going to have enough hours to make that many items. Okay, we've only got a capacity of 2,400 minutes. Okay, so where should we focus our efforts? Should we focus on product one or product two? All right. So remember on the previous slide, how many units of each product can be processed through machine A1 in 1 minute? So product one needs a minute to create one unit, but product two only needs half a minute. So you can produce two of them per minute. All right. Which is going to generate the most profit? Product two. The reason is, even though it only contributes, its contribution margin is only $15 per unit, you can make 2 units per minute, which is an overall contribution margin of $30, which is greater than the $24 for product one, because you can only make one of these per minute. Okay, does that make sense? All right. Again, the key is the contribution margin per unit of the constrained resource, right? So Ensign should emphasize product two because it generates a contribution margin of $30 per minute of the constrained resource relative to 24 per minute for product one. Ensign can maximize its contribution margin by first producing product two until they've met all the demand for product two, and then using any excess capacity to produce product one. Okay, so they fulfill the demand for product two, 2,200 units. At half a minute per unit, that's 1,100 minutes. All right. Then they've got total capacity on the machine is 2,400. So if you subtract what we need to make product two, we have another 1,300 minutes to make some product one. We can make 1,300 units of that to maximize our profits. Okay. So according to the plan we made on the previous slide, we would produce 2,200 units of product one and 1,300, or sorry, 2,200 of product two, 1,300 of product one. Okay. And our contribution margins would look like this. All right. Our total contribution margin would be 64,200. Okay, so we had to run through all those calculations because we had that bottleneck on that one machine. Okay, so what if we eased that by obtaining more of the constrained resource? Okay, so if we increase the capacity of a constrained resource, it would lead to increased production and sales, right? So how much should you be willing to pay for an additional machine A1? Okay, minute of A1 time. All right. So the additional machine time would be used to make more units of product one because we're already meeting our demand for product two. All right. So product one has a contribution margin of $24 per unit. So you should be willing to pay $24 per minute for more machine time because it takes 1 minute to make one of these units. So that's your break-even point. Okay. Anything less expensive than that, and your more machine hours equal profit. Okay. Great. Here is another example. I will let you guys work through that on your own time. All right, so how do we manage these constraints? All right, you can sometimes increase the capacity of a bottleneck. That's called relaxing the bottleneck or relaxing the constraint. You can, if your issue is man hours, you can work people overtime. You can subcontract out some of your labor. You could buy additional machines if machine hours are the issue, or you could shift workers off of the non-bottleneck processes, places where you have excess capacity. You could move those workers over to the bottleneck areas. Okay. You could focus on business improvements, okay, that make your operations more efficient and effective. Okay. You can reduce the number of defective units processed through the bottleneck. Okay, again, making it more efficient. All right. Last thing we're going to cover is this idea of joint products. Okay. In some industries, you have two or more products that we're calling joint products that are produced from a single raw material. The point in the manufacturing process where they separate from each other is called the split off point. Okay, so we need to make a decision at that point whether we should process the raw material further. Okay, that's called the sell or process further decision. All right, so our example here is with petroleum products. Okay, you've got crude oil that goes through a common production process, and then at the split off point, we can make it either into oil, gasoline, or petrochemicals. Okay. So oil requires separate processing for final sale. Gasoline is ready at the split off point, and then petrochemicals also need separate processing to reach final sales. That means that both oil and chemicals are going to have separate product costs. All right. So, one of the things that can muddy the water is this allocation of joint costs. Okay. One allocation method that we tend to use is the relative sales value of these end products. All right. So we do have to allocate costs for some of our calculations. All right. But it can muddy the waters when it comes to decision making. We just need to be aware of that. Okay. So remember that the joint costs are going to be irrelevant. All right. We'll have those no matter what. So we're only looking at from the split off point forward what additional costs we are incurring. All right. So those joint costs should not be allocated to end products for decision-making process purposes. Maybe when you're establishing your cost of goods sold for your external reporting, that's something completely different. Okay. When you're making these sell or process further decisions, sometimes it's going to be profitable to continue processing a joint product after the split off point, okay? But only if the incremental revenue from processing it exceeds the incremental processing costs incurred after the split off point. And guess what? We have an example. So Sawmill Inc. cuts logs from which unfinished lumber and sawdust are the joint products. Okay, so unfinished lumber can be sold as is, or we can process it further to finished lumber. Sawdust can be sold as is, or it can be processed further into Presto logs. So, here's the sales value of each of our products after the split off point. All right. Here is the at the split off point, sorry. Here's the sales value after processing. Okay. So this sawdust becomes Presto logs, this lumber becomes finished lumber. Okay, allocated joint product costs, costs of further processing. All right. So final sales value after further processing, lumber 270, sawdust 50. Okay. Incremental revenue from further processing, 130 for the lumber, 10 for the sawdust. Okay. Cost of further processing, $50 for the lumber, $20 for sawdust. All right. So if we continue processing the sawdust, we're working at a loss. But if we continue processing the lumber, there's a gain there. Okay. So the lumber should be processed further and the sawdust should be sold at the split off point. Okay. Your activity-based costing can be used to help identify those relevant costs for decision-making purposes. But managers should exercise caution against reading more into the traceability than really exists. Okay. So people think that if a cost is traceable to a segment, then that cost is automatically avoidable, which isn't necessarily true. All right. So you, as the managers, have to decide which relevant costs are actually avoidable between the two decisions. Okay. All right. I am going to end there. Thank you so much for listening to me babble. I look forward to seeing you all in class Monday morning. Please ask any questions that you have. Take care.